The Arizona wilderness held its breath in the frozen silence of January 1887. Snow fell in thick curtains across the high desert, transforming the landscape into something unrecognizable, something that belonged more to the stories men told around fires than to the waking world. The temperature had dropped to 5 degrees below zero, and every living thing with sense had found shelter hours ago. Elijah Morgan was not among them. He ran through the snow with blood streaming from his left shoulder, each breath tearing through his lungs like broken glass. His boots punched through the frozen crust with every desperate step, and behind him he could hear the thunder of hooves growing closer. The man chasing him was named Diego, something one of 3 banditos who had ambushed him at the elk watering hole 2 miles back. Elijah had killed the other 2, but Diego had gotten lucky with his rifle shot before Elijah could reload. Now Diego wanted to finish what he had started. Elijah's horse lay dead in a ravine a quarter-mile behind him, its neck broken in the scramble to escape the initial volley of gunfire. He had grabbed his rifle and his knife and run, leaving everything else behind. The wound in his shoulder burned like someone had pressed a branding iron against his flesh, and he could feel the warmth of his own blood soaking through his shirt, despite the killing cold. 4 months had passed since Geronimo had surrendered to General Miles down in Skeleton Canyon. 4 months since the Apache Wars had officially ended. But the wilderness did not care about official endings. Out here in this frozen hell between the territories of men and the territories of God, the old rules still applied. Kill or be killed. Survive or die trying. Elijah had been a scout during the Apache campaigns. He had tracked men through country that would break most souls just to look at. He had learned to read sign in dust so fine it barely existed to find water where there was none to move through the desert like smoke through a keyhole. But none of that mattered now. His shoulders screamed with every movement, his vision swam at the edges, and he knew with the cold certainty of experience that if he did not find shelter in the next hour, the blood loss and the cold would finish what Diego's bullet had started. The sound of hooves stopped. Elijah froze his breath, coming in ragged gasps that sent white clouds into the freezing air. He pressed himself against a boulder, rifle raised despite the way his shoulders shrieked in protest. Silence stretched out across the wilderness. Then he heard it, the soft crunch of boots on snow. Diego had dismounted. Smart. A man on foot could move quieter, could check his corners, could flush his prey without giving them a clear shot. Elijah looked around with the desperate calculation of a hunted animal. To his left, the ground dropped away into a steep ravine choked with dead brush. To his right, more boulders climbed toward a ridge line that offered no cover. Ahead, through the curtain of falling snow, he could just make out the dark mouth of what might be a cave or might just be a shadow. He made his choice. Moving as quietly as his wounded body would allow, Elijah pushed away from the boulder and stumbled forward. His boots found ice beneath the snow, and he nearly went down, catching himself on his rifle at the last second. The movement sent fresh agony through his shoulder, and he bit down on his tongue hard enough to taste copper. Behind him, Diego's footsteps quickened. The man had heard something. Elijah ran. The cave mouth grew larger as he approached, and yes, it was real, a crack in the rock face wide enough for a man to squeeze through. He hit the opening at full speed and plunged into darkness so complete it was like falling into ink. His momentum carried him forward another 3 steps before his boot caught on something, and he went down hard, his rifle clattering away across stone. For a moment he just lay there, gasping, listening to his own heartbeat thunder in his ears. Then he heard it. Breathing. Not his own. Someone else was in the cave. Elijah's hand went to the knife at his belt, pulling it free as he pushed himself up onto his knees. His eyes had not adjusted to the darkness yet, but he could hear movement now, the rustle of fabric, the soft scuff of feet on stone. Big feet. Whatever was in here with him was large. "Who's there?" His voice came out rough, barely more than a rasp. The breathing stopped. Then a voice answered him in English, though the accent was thick, the words shaped by a mouth more comfortable with a different language entirely. "You can kill me if you want, but I will not run any more." A woman's voice. Elijah blinked his eyes, starting to adjust. Shapes emerged from the darkness. The cave was deeper than he had thought, opening up into a chamber perhaps 20 feet across. Against the far wall he could make out a figure. No two figures. One standing impossibly tall, her head nearly brushing the low ceiling. The other much smaller, huddled behind the first. Before he could speak, before he could process what he was seeing, Diego's voice rang out from the cave entrance. "Morgan, I know you are in there. Come out and I make it quick. Yes." Elijah's hand tightened on his knife. He looked toward the entrance, then back at the tall woman. Even in the dimness, he could see her tense, could see her shift her weight to put herself more completely between him and the smaller figure behind her. "You are running from someone," she said quietly. "So am I." Diego fired a shot into the cave. The bullet spanged off stone somewhere to Elijah's left and went whining off into the darkness. The smaller figure, the child, let out a small cry of fear. Elijah made his decision in that instant the way he had made 1,000 decisions in the war, with no time to think and no room for doubt. He turned toward the cave entrance and called out, "Diego, you want me. Come and get me." Then he moved, flowing sideways into the deeper shadows along the cave wall. His shoulder protested, but he ignored it, focusing everything on staying silent, staying invisible. He heard Diego's boots crunch in the snow outside, heard the man's breathing as he approached the entrance. The bandito came in fast, his silhouette blocking the gray light from outside, his rifle up and ready. Elijah waited until the man had taken 3 steps into the darkness, waited until Diego's eyes would be uselessly adjusting to the lack of light, and then he moved. He came up behind Diego like a ghost, his knife finding the gap between the man's ribs with the awful precision of long practice. Diego made a sound something between a gasp and a sigh, and his rifle clattered to the stone floor. Elijah held the man as he died, lowering him down as gently as the situation allowed, and when it was over, he stepped back and let the knife fall from his nerveless fingers. He had killed 12 Apache during the wars. He had told himself it was duty, told himself it was necessary, told himself a lot of things that made it possible to sleep at night. But he had never killed a man with a knife before, never felt the life go out of someone while looking into their eyes. The cave spun around him. His knees buckled and he went down hard, his wounded shoulder hitting stone. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the tall woman stepping forward, her face coming into focus for the first time. She was Apache, and she was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. Then the world went black. When Elijah woke, he did not know where he was. The darkness was complete, and for a terrible moment, he thought he had gone blind. Then he became aware of warmth, of the smell of smoke, of the crackle of a small fire somewhere nearby. He tried to sit up and his shoulder exploded with fresh pain. A hand pressed against his chest, gentle but firm, pushing him back down. "Do not move. You will open the wound again." The woman's voice. The Apache woman. Memory came flooding back, and with it a surge of adrenaline that nearly made him fight against the hand holding him down. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the gentleness of that pressure. Maybe it was the exhaustion that filled every cell of his body. Maybe it was just that he had no strength left to fight. "Where am I?" he managed. "In the cave. Where else would you be?" His eyes were adjusting now. The fire was small, barely more than a handful of burning twigs, but it gave enough light for him to see. The woman sat beside him, her face cast in shadows and firelight. She was even taller than he had realized, her frame powerful in a way that spoke of hard labor and harder living. Her hair was long and black, tied back with a strip of leather. Her eyes were dark and watchful, and she was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. "The man who followed you is dead," she said. "I dragged his body outside. Animals will take care of it." "You could have left me," Elijah said. "Could have taken his horse and gone." "Yes. Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving over his face like she was trying to read something written there in a language she was only half familiar with. "Because you did not shoot me when you had the chance," she said finally. "Because you killed the man who would have killed both of us. Because—" she paused. "Because I am tired of running." Elijah tried to sit up again, and this time she let him, though he could see the disapproval in her face. His shoulder had been bandaged with strips of cloth torn from his own shirt. The bleeding had stopped, but the pain was still there, a dull throb that promised worse things if he pushed himself too hard. "What's your name?" he asked. Kai-Iti. I'm Elijah Morgan. She nodded like this was information she had already known, or perhaps like names did not matter very much in the current situation. You were a scout, she said. It was not a question. How did you know? I can see it in the way you move, in the way you came into this cave. You have hunted my people. There was no accusation in her voice, just a statement of fact. Elijah found he could not meet her eyes. Yes, he said, during the war. How many did you kill? The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Elijah thought about lying, about deflecting, about all the ways he had learned to avoid this particular truth. But something about this woman, about this moment, made dishonesty feel impossible. 12, he said quietly, that I know of for certain, maybe more. Kai-Iti was silent. Behind her, in the deeper shadows, Elijah could see the small figure of the child curled up asleep near the fire. A girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, her face peaceful in the way only children could manage even in the worst circumstances. Who is she? Elijah asked. My sister's daughter. Her name is Little Sparrow. Kai-Iti's voice softened when she spoke of the child. Her mother died 2 years ago when the soldiers burned our village. I am all she has left. The army is looking for her, aren't they? Kai-Iti's eyes snapped back to his face, suddenly sharp, suddenly dangerous. How do you know this? Because I know who she is. She's Chief Naichi's granddaughter. The army wants to use her to force the last of the Apache to surrender completely. For a long moment, Kai-Iti just stared at him. Then slowly her hand moved to something at her belt. Elijah realized it was a knife, a long blade with a bone handle, and her fingers wrapped around it with easy familiarity. If you know this, she said quietly, then you know there is a bounty on her head. $500 to whoever brings her in. I do. So why have you not tried to take her? Elijah looked past her at the sleeping child, at the small face that held no knowledge of borders or wars or the terrible machinery of conquest that had ground her people to dust. He thought about Catherine, his sister, who had killed herself in his barn 3 years ago. He thought about Mary, his wife, who had died because he had chosen duty over humanity. He thought about all the choices he had made in the name of doing what was right instead of doing what was good. Because, he said, meeting Kai-Iti's eyes again, I owe you a life. She blinked. What do you mean? Fort Apache, 3 years ago. A group of renegade Apache attacked a wagon train of settlers. Most of the warriors wanted to kill everyone but one woman, an Apache woman who stood nearly 7 feet tall. She stopped them. She convinced them to let the white women and children go free. Kai-Iti had gone very still. My sister was in that wagon train, Elijah continued. Her name was Catherine. She told me about the giant Apache woman who saved her life. She said that woman had eyes that held more sadness than should fit in one person. She said that woman had scars on her back that looked like they had been put there by a whip. Slowly, Kai-Iti's hand released the knife. Your sister, she said. What happened to her? She killed herself 2 years later. The things she saw in that attack, they never left her. She hanged herself in my barn while I was out checking the fences. I am sorry. Don't be. You gave her 2 more years of life. That's more than she would have had otherwise. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them, the wind howling outside the cave mouth. Finally, Kai-Iti spoke again. What happens now? Now we wait for the storm to pass. Then we figure out how to keep Little Sparrow alive. We. Elijah nodded. We. Kai-Iti studied his face for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded back. Outside, the wind picked up, driving the snow horizontal across the mouth of the cave. Inside, in the small circle of firelight, 2 people who should have been enemies began the slow, careful process of becoming something else entirely. The storm lasted 3 days. On the first day, they barely spoke. Elijah drifted in and out of consciousness, his body fighting the infection that tried to take root in his shoulder wound. When he was awake, he watched Kaede care for little Sparrow, watched the gentle way she braided the child's hair, the soft songs she sang in Apache that made the little girl smile despite their circumstances. When he slept, he dreamed of Catherine swinging from a rope of Mary bleeding out in the back of a wagon, of all the dead faces that haunted the spaces behind his closed eyes. On the second day, his fever broke. He woke to find Kaede replacing the bandage on his shoulder with fresh strips of cloth. Her hands were surprisingly gentle for someone so large, her touch careful as she cleaned the wound with snow melted over the fire and mixed with something that smelled sharp and medicinal. "What is that?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Yerba mansa. It grows near water even in winter if you know where to look. It will help fight the poison in your blood." "Where did you learn that?" "From my grandmother. She was a healer before the soldiers killed her." There was no heat in her voice when she said it, just the flatness of old grief worn smooth by time. Elijah found he had no response that would not sound hollow, so he said nothing. Little Sparrow approached, while Kaede worked her dark eyes, curious and unafraid. She said something in Apache, and Kaede responded in the same language, her voice taking on a warmth it did not hold when she spoke English. "What did she say?" Elijah asked. "She asked if you were going to die. I told her no." "How can you be sure?" Kaede tied off the bandage with practiced efficiency. "Because you are too stubborn. I can see it in your eyes. You have things you still need to do before you will let yourself die." She was right, though Elijah could not have said exactly what those things were. Survive, maybe. Atone, possibly. Find some way to balance the scales of all the wrong he had done. But those were not the kind of thoughts a man shared with a stranger, even a stranger who had saved his life. "Tell me about little Sparrow," he said instead. "Tell me how you ended up in this cave." Kaede settled back against the cave wall, her long legs stretched out in front of her. In the firelight, Elijah could see the scars she carried, burns on her forearms, a long pale line across her collarbone, the marks of a hard life lived in a hard world. After Geronimo surrendered, the army began rounding up all the Apache they could find. They wanted to send everyone to Florida, to the reservation there, but some of us refused to go. We knew what happened to our people in those places: disease, starvation, the slow death of the spirit. She paused, her eyes distant. Little Sparrow's grandfather, Chief Naiche, he tried to negotiate. He said he would surrender if they let his family stay in Arizona on land that had belonged to our people since before the white man came. But the army refused. They wanted total surrender, no conditions, no mercy. "So Naiche sent Little Sparrow away," Elijah said. Kaede nodded. "He asked me to take her to Mexico, to the Sierra Madre, where some of our people still hide. But the journey is long and the army has patrols everywhere. We have been running for 3 months, hiding, starving, freezing." Little Sparrow had curled up next to Kaede now, her small body pressed against the woman's side. Kaede's arm came around her, automatically protective, tender. "She is all I have left of my sister," Kaede said quietly. "My sister died trying to escape the soldiers. She made me promise to keep Little Sparrow safe, to get her somewhere the white man's wars could not reach her. I will die before I break that promise." Elijah heard the steel in her voice and recognized it. He had heard the same tone in his own voice when he spoke of duty, of obligation, of the things a man must do regardless of the cost. But there was something else there too. Love, fierce and unconditional. The kind of love that made people do impossible things. "How far is it to the Sierra Madre?" he asked. "From here, maybe 200 miles, through country thick with army patrols and bounty hunters. And you're wounded." Kaede touched the bandage on her thigh, the one Elijah had only now noticed. "A bullet. 2 weeks ago. A patrol spotted us near the border. I killed one soldier, wounded another. The third one shot me before I could reload." "Can you walk on it?" "I can do whatever is necessary." Elijah believed her. This was a woman who had learned to make necessity her only master. On the third day, the storm began to break. The wind died down and the snow stopped falling, though the cold remained bitter and absolute. Elijah managed to stand for the first time, his legs shaky but functional. His shoulders still hurt, but the pain had dulled to something manageable, something he could work around. He made his way to the cave entrance and looked out at a transformed world. Snow lay thick across everything, erasing landmarks, turning the familiar strange. Diego's body was gone, dragged away by coyotes or mountain lions or some other scavenger. His horse, however, had survived, standing in a small grove of juniper trees about 50 yards from the cave, its coat crusted with ice. Kaiti came to stand beside him. Even prepared for it, her height was startling. She had to duck to avoid hitting her head on the cave ceiling, and standing next to him she was nearly a foot taller. But there was nothing awkward about her movements, nothing that suggested she was uncomfortable with her size. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who had long since stopped apologizing for taking up space. "We cannot stay here," she said. "I know. The child needs food, real food, not just the rabbits I can trap, and she is starting to cough. If she gets sick out here—" She did not need to finish the sentence. They both knew what sickness meant in this country, especially for a child. "My ranch is 8 miles from here," Elijah said. "I have food, medicine, a warm fire." Kaiti looked at him sharply. "You would take us there after everything I told you. Would you rather freeze out here? I would rather not walk into a trap." Elijah turned to face her fully. "I'm not going to turn you in. I already told you that. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. Then let me prove it with actions." They stood there, eyes locked, the cold wind whipping snow around them. Finally, Kaiti nodded. "If you betray us, I will kill you, no matter what it costs me." Fair enough. They gathered what little they had and set out into the white wilderness. Diego's horse carried Little Sparrow wrapped in blankets scavenged from the dead bandito's saddlebags. Elijah and Kaiti walked, their breath steaming in the frigid air, their boots crunching through the frozen crust. They did not talk much. Talking required breath, and breath was a precious commodity when every inhalation felt like swallowing knives. But there was a strange comfort in the silence, in the simple, shared struggle of putting one foot in front of the other, in the knowledge that they were both moving toward the same goal, even if they did not fully trust each other yet. As they walked, Elijah found himself studying Kaiti from the corner of his eye. The way she moved through the snow with barely a sound, despite her size. The way she constantly scanned their surroundings, her head turning at every small noise, every shift in the wind. The way she kept one hand always near the knife at her belt. She had been a warrior once, he realized. Maybe still was. She had the alertness of someone who had survived too many fights to ever truly relax. "How did you get so tall?" he asked after they had been walking for an hour. Kaiti glanced at him. "Is that the white man's way of being polite? Asking about the thing everyone notices but pretends they do not see? I'm just curious." She was quiet for a while, her eyes on the horizon. Then she spoke. "When I was born, my grandmother said the spirits had marked me for something important. Among our people, unusual size is seen as a sign of power. But as I grew and kept growing, some began to fear me. They said I was touched by dark magic, that I would bring misfortune to the tribe." "Did you—" "My parents died when I was 10. A raiding party killed my father, and my mother died of grief 6 months later. After that, I was raised by my sister and my grandmother. They never feared me. They taught me to be proud of my strength, to see it as a gift rather than a curse." She paused, adjusting the rifle slung across her back. "But the white soldiers, when they came, they did not see a gift. They saw a monster. They called me giant, savage, freak. They said I was proof that the Apache were not fully human." Elijah felt something twist in his chest. He had heard soldiers talk that way, had probably talked that way himself once, back when it was easier to see the Apache as something less than people. "I'm sorry," he said. "Do not apologize for things you did not do. It is meaningless." "Then I apologize for the things I did do." Kaiti looked at him, then really looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "The 12 Apache you killed, do you remember their faces?" "Some of them." "Were any of them women?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He wanted to lie, wanted to say no, wanted to preserve some scrap of dignity, but he had already decided that he would not lie to this woman. Two of them were women. One was elderly, maybe 60. The other was young, maybe 20. They were trying to protect the children when we attacked their camp. And you killed them anyway. And I killed them anyway. They walked on in silence. Little Sparrow had fallen asleep on the horse, her small body swaying with the animal's motion. The sun was beginning to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold that were almost too beautiful to bear. Finally, Kaiti spoke again. "Why are you helping us now? Is it guilt?" "Partly," Elijah admitted, "but also because I'm tired of being the kind of man who does terrible things and calls it duty. I'm tired of choosing orders over people. I'm tired of waking up every morning and hating the face I see when I look in a mirror." "So we are your redemption." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to do one good thing before I die. Does the reason matter?" Kaiti was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than he had heard it before. "My grandmother used to say that a man's worth is not measured by his worst moments, but by what he does after them. She said that redemption is always possible, but only for those brave enough to seek it." "Your grandmother sounds like she was wise." "She was. That is why the soldiers killed her." They reached Elijah's ranch as the last light was fading from the sky. It was a simple place, a single-story house built from adobe and rough timber with a barn and a small corral. Smoke rose from the chimney, which was strange because Elijah had not left a fire burning when he departed 3 days ago. He held up a hand, stopping Kaiti. She immediately understood, her hand going to her knife as she scanned the area. There were 2 horses tied to the hitching post in front of the house. Visitors. "But who—" "Stay here," Elijah whispered. "Let me see who it is." But before he could move, the front door of the house opened, and 2 men stepped out onto the porch. One was older, maybe 50, with skin the color of rich earth and gray threading through his hair. The other was younger, in his early 20s, with the same dark skin and similar features. Father and son clearly. The older man's face broke into a smile when he saw Elijah. "Elijah, we were starting to worry you had frozen to death out there." Elijah relaxed slightly. "Virgil, Jesse, what are you doing here? Your horse came back without you 3 days ago. We figured you had run into trouble." The older man Virgil started down the steps, then stopped abruptly when he saw Kaiti step out from behind the horse, Little Sparrow cradled in her arms. Jesse, the younger man, went rigid. His hand moved toward the rifle leaning against the porch railing. "Elijah," Virgil said carefully, his eyes never leaving Kaiti, "you want to explain why there's an Apache woman standing in your yard." This was the moment where everything could fall apart, where the fragile trust he had been building with Kaiti could shatter like glass. Elijah took a breath and made his choice. "Because she saved my life," he said clearly, "and because I owe her a debt I intend to pay." Virgil's eyes moved from Kaiti to Little Sparrow and back again. Something changed in his expression, a kind of recognition mixed with something that might have been pain. "That child," he said slowly, "she is Apache royalty, is she not, Chief Naiche's blood?" Elijah felt Kaiti tense beside him. "How do you know that?" "Because 15 years ago I was stationed at Fort Grant. I knew Naiche when he was young before the wars got so bad, and I know the army has been looking for that little girl." Jesse had picked up his rifle now, though he had not yet raised it. "Pa, we need to report this. There's a bounty." But Virgil held up a hand, silencing his son. He looked at Elijah for a long moment, and something passed between them, some understanding built on years of friendship and shared grief. "Elijah," Virgil said quietly, "after Catherine died, you were there for me. You helped me through the worst time of my life. So I am going to ask you one question, and I need you to answer me truthfully. Do you vouch for this woman?" "I do." "Even knowing what the army will do if they find out you are harboring her?" "Even knowing that." Virgil nodded slowly. Then he turned to his son. Jesse put the rifle down. "But Pa—" "Put it down, son. Now." Jesse hesitated, confusion and anger warring on his young face, but he obeyed, setting the rifle back against the porch railing. Virgil turned back to Kaede, and when he spoke his voice was gentle. "Ma'am, you and the child are welcome here. Any friend of Elijah's has a place at my table." Kaede stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. They went inside into the warmth and light, and as the door closed behind them, Elijah allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he had made the right choice for once in his life. But outside in the gathering darkness, the sound of hoofbeats approached. Many hoofbeats. And with them came the end of their brief moment of peace. Marshal Edmund Price had arrived. The warmth of the house enveloped them like a blanket, but it brought no comfort. Elijah could feel the tension radiating from Kaede as she stood just inside the doorway. Little Sparrow clutched against her chest, her eyes darting to every corner of the room as if cataloging escape routes. She was a wild thing brought into captivity, and every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run. Virgil moved to the fireplace and began building up the flames, his movements slow and deliberate, clearly trying not to spook their unexpected guest. Jesse remained by the window, his young face tight with barely concealed anxiety. The boy kept glancing at his father, then at Kaede, as if trying to understand what kind of madness had possessed them all. "There is food," Virgil said without turning around. "Stew on the stove, bread from this morning. It is not much, but it is hot." Kaede did not move. Her eyes had fixed on something across the room, and Elijah followed her gaze to see what had captured her attention. It was a photograph in a simple wooden frame, sitting on the mantel above the fireplace. The image showed a woman with dark hair and a gentle smile standing beside a younger version of Virgil. "That was my wife," Virgil said quietly, noticing where Kaede was looking. "Ayanna. She died 5 years ago." "Ayanna," Kaede repeated, and there was something in her voice that made everyone in the room turn to look at her. "Ayanna of the Chiricahua, who was born near the Gila River." Virgil straightened slowly, his hand going still on the poker he had been using to tend the fire. "You knew her." "She taught me to use the bow when I was a child. She was one of the few in our tribe who did not fear my size. She said I was blessed by the spirits, that my strength was a gift to be honored." The silence that followed was so profound that Elijah could hear the wind pushing against the windows, could hear the crackle of the fire, could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Virgil's face had gone slack with shock, and when he spoke his voice was barely a whisper. "She spoke of you, years ago before she died. She told me about a girl in her village who stood taller than any man who could draw a bow that most warriors could not even string. She said that girl would do great things one day, that the spirits had marked her for an important destiny." Kaede's grip on Little Sparrow tightened. "What happened to her?" Virgil turned back to the fire, and when he answered his voice was thick with old grief. "She was killed by settlers. They found her trying to return to her people after the army had relocated them. They did not care that she was married to me, that she had done nothing wrong. They saw an Apache woman alone on the trail and they shot her like an animal." Jesse had gone pale, his eyes wide as he stared at his father. "Pa, what are you saying Ma was Apache?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Virgil turned to face his son, and the pain on his face was naked and raw. "Your mother was Chiricahua Apache. We married in secret in 1870 when I was stationed at Fort Grant. Back then such things were forbidden. But we loved each other, and we did not care about the rules. When you were born, we decided to raise you away from both our peoples to give you a chance at a life not defined by the wars between red and white." Jesse's face cycled through a dozen emotions, shock giving way to confusion, giving way to something that might have been anger or might have been grief. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the sound of horses approaching cut through the night. Many horses. Elijah moved to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see. 6 riders were coming up the road toward the house, and even in the darkness he could make out the distinctive profile of the man leading them. Tall in the saddle, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew that wherever he went, His authority went with him. Marshal Edmund Price. "Get away from the window," Elijah said sharply to Kaiti. "Take Little Sparrow into the back room and stay there." But Kaiti did not move. She had set Little Sparrow down and now stood with her hand on her knife, her face set in hard lines. "I will not hide. This is not about pride. If he sees you, there is nothing I can do to protect you." "I do not need your protection." Elijah turned to face her, fully frustration boiling up inside him. "Yes, you do. That is Edmund Price. He is a federal marshal, and he has the authority to arrest anyone he considers a threat to the peace. If he sees you and Little Sparrow, he will take you both back to the fort, and from there you will be sent to Florida with the rest of your people. Is that what you want?" Something in his voice must have gotten through to her, because after a long moment she bent and scooped up Little Sparrow. The child had been watching the adults with wide, frightened eyes, and she wrapped her arms around Kaiti's neck without being told. "If you betray us," Kaiti said quietly, "I will kill you. I do not care if it costs me my life." "I know." She disappeared into the back room just as the sound of boots on the porch announced the marshal's arrival. There was a sharp knock on the door, the kind of knock that expected to be answered immediately. Virgil and Elijah exchanged a glance, and then Virgil moved to open it. Edmund Price stood on the threshold like a figure from a biblical judgment, his face weathered and hard, his eyes the color of winter ice. He was in his mid-40s but looked older, the weight of his office carved into every line of his face. Behind him, 5 deputies fanned out across the porch, their hands resting casually on their weapons. "Virgil Kane," Price said, and his voice was like gravel being ground underfoot. "It has been a long time." Virgil's face had gone carefully blank. "Marshal Price, I did not expect to see you in this territory. I did not expect to be here, but sometimes duty takes us to unexpected places." Price's eyes moved past Virgil to take in the interior of the house, lingering on Elijah for a moment before returning to Virgil. "May I come in? I have traveled a long way and I have things we need to discuss." It was not really a question. Virgil stepped aside and Price entered, his deputies following. They spread out through the room with the practiced efficiency of men used to working together, their eyes cataloging everything, missing nothing. One of them, a young man with a thin mustache and nervous energy, moved toward the hallway that led to the back rooms, but Price held up a hand. "Stay where you are, Frank. We are guests here, and guests should remember their manners." The deputy, Frank Dobbs, stepped back reluctantly, though his eyes kept darting toward the hallway, as if he could sense something was not quite right. Price removed his hat and turned to face Virgil fully. 25 years ago at Fort Grant, you helped a group of Apache prisoners escape from the stockade. Among them was a woman named Ayanna, who you had married in secret. The Army classified your actions as desertion and treason. There was a warrant issued for your arrest. Jesse made a sound something between a gasp and a choke. Elijah saw the young man's hand move toward his rifle, but Virgil shook his head sharply. "That warrant is still active." Price continued, his voice never rising, never falling, as level and inexorable as the march of time itself. "I have been running and hiding for 15 years. I have tracked you across 3 territories and 2 states. I have followed rumors and whispers and the faintest traces of your passage. And now, finally, I have found you." Virgil met the marshal's eyes steadily. "So you are here to arrest me." "I am here to do my duty. Even though the war is over, even though Geronimo has surrendered and the Apache are no longer a threat. The war may be over, but justice is eternal. You broke the law, Virgil. You betrayed your oath as a soldier. Those actions have consequences regardless of how much time has passed." Elijah stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving toward the pistol at his belt. "Edmund Virgil is a good man. He only did what any decent person would do when faced with an impossible choice." Price turned his ice-blue eyes on Elijah, and there was something in that gaze that made the room feel suddenly colder. "Elijah Morgan, I heard you had settled in this area. I am glad to see the rumors of your death were exaggerated. We have known each other a long time, Edmund. You know Virgil would not have done what he did without good reason. I know many things, Elijah. I know that Virgil Kane was one of the finest Buffalo soldiers I ever had the privilege to serve alongside. I know that he was brave and honorable and devoted to his duty. I also know that he committed treason against the United States Army, and that is a crime I cannot ignore no matter how much I might wish to. Price moved to the fireplace, his eyes finding the photograph of Ayanna. He studied it for a long moment, and when he spoke again there was something in his voice that might have been regret. I knew her, you know, Ayanna. She used to bring water to the soldiers at the fort when we were on long patrols. She was kind even to men who treated her with suspicion and contempt. I remember thinking that if more people were like her, perhaps there would have been no need for war. Then you understand why I could not let her die in that stockade, Virgil said quietly. The conditions there were inhuman. Disease was rampant. Women and children were dying every week. I did not free the prisoners because I wanted to betray my country. I did it because I could not stand by and watch my wife die. Price turned back from the photograph, and the moment of softness was gone, replaced by the iron resolve that had made him one of the most feared lawmen in the territory. I understand, Virgil, I truly do. But understanding does not change the law. It does not erase what you did, and it does not allow me to simply walk away and pretend I never found you. Jesse could contain himself no longer. He stepped forward, his young face flushed with emotion. Marshal, my father is not a criminal. He is the best man I have ever known. He has spent his entire life trying to do right by people trying to make up for whatever sins you think he committed. You cannot arrest him for saving his own wife. Price looked at the young man with something that might have been pity. I am sorry, son, but I can and I must. Then you will have to arrest me too, Elijah said, because I am not going to let you take him without a fight. Price sighed a long exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of years. Elijah, do not make this harder than it needs to be. I have 5 armed deputies. You are wounded and outnumbered. There is no version of this situation where you come out ahead. Before Elijah could respond, the door to the back room opened and Kaidi stepped out. She had left Little Sparrow hidden somewhere, and now she stood at her full height, her head nearly brushing the ceiling, her presence filling the room like a physical force. Every gun in the room immediately swung toward her. Do not shoot, Price said sharply to his deputies. Then to Kaidi, who are you? I am the one they are protecting, Kaidi said calmly. I am Apache. I am wanted by the army. If you want to arrest someone for harboring a fugitive, arrest me for being one. Price's eyes narrowed as he studied her, taking in her unusual height, the proud set of her shoulders, the complete absence of fear in her face. What is your name? Kaidi of the Chiricahua. Recognition flashed across Price's face. I have heard of you. They call you the Giant. They say you killed 2 soldiers when they tried to capture you near the border. They tried to kill a child I was protecting. I defended her. If that makes me a killer, then yes, I am guilty. Where is the child now? Somewhere safe. Somewhere you will never find her. Frank Dobbs, the nervous deputy, had been edging closer to the hallway, and now he spoke up, his voice high and tight with tension. Marshal, I can search the house. The kid has to be here somewhere. But before Price could respond, before anyone could move, the front door burst open and a 6th rider stumbled in, his clothes torn and bloody, his face pale with shock and pain. He collapsed against the doorframe, gasping for breath. Marshal, the man wheezed. We got trouble, big trouble. Price moved to the man's side, steadying him. Calm down, Peters. What happened? It is Captain Reed, sir, from Fort Huachuca. He is coming this way with 20 soldiers. Someone in town told him about the Apache woman, and he is coming to arrest her himself. He wants the glory of capturing Chief Naichi's granddaughter. Every person in this room went still. Elijah felt his stomach drop. Captain Jonathan Reed was young, ambitious, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of advancement. If he arrived and found Kaidi, there would be no reasoning with him, no possibility of mercy. Price's jaw tightened. How far out is he? Maybe 20 minutes. He was riding hard when I passed him. Price turned to look at Kaidi, then at Virgil, then at Elijah. For a long moment no one spoke. Then the marshal did something that surprised everyone in the room. He walked to the front door, stepped out onto the porch, and called to his deputies. "Mount up, we are leaving." Frank Dobbs stared at him in confusion. "But Marshal, we just got here. What about Kane? What about the Apache woman?" Price turned to face his deputy, and his voice could have cut glass. "I said we are leaving Dobbs. That is an order." "But, sir, do you see anyone here who matches the description of Virgil Kane, the fugitive we have been tracking? Because I do not. All I see is a man named Virgil and his son who were kind enough to offer shelter to a weary marshal and his men. As for the Apache woman, I see a civilian who is standing in a private residence on private property, bothering no one." Frank's face flushed red. "Marshal, you cannot be serious. You have been hunting Kane for 15 years. And in those 15 years I have learned something, Deputy. I have learned that sometimes the law and justice are not the same thing. I have learned that a man can follow the rules so closely that he forgets why the rules exist in the first place. I have learned that duty without mercy is just another form of cruelty." Price looked back at Virgil, and something passed between them, some understanding that existed beyond words. "You have a good life here, Virgil. A son who loves you. Friends who would risk everything to protect you. Do not waste it." Then he turned to Kaiti. "As for you, I suggest you take that child and get as far from here as possible. Captain Reed will not be as understanding as I am. If he finds you, there will be nothing anyone can do to help you." Kaiti inclined her head slightly, the gesture carrying a weight of respect. "Thank you, Marshal." "Do not thank me. I am not doing this for you. I am doing this because I am tired of being the kind of man who cannot sleep at night because of the choices I have made in the name of duty." Price moved toward the door, but Frank Dobbs did not follow. The young deputy stood his ground, his hand moving to the pistol at his belt, his face twisted with righteous anger. "This is wrong, Marshal. This is a betrayal of everything we are supposed to stand for. We are lawmen. We do not just let criminals walk free because we feel sorry for them." "Stand down, Deputy," Price said, his voice low and dangerous. "No, sir, I will not. If you will not do your duty, then I will do it for you." Frank drew his pistol and aimed it at Virgil. "Virgil Kane, you are under arrest for desertion and—" The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Frank stumbled backward, a look of surprise on his face as a red stain spread across his chest. He looked down at the wound, then up at Kaiti, who stood with a smoking pistol in her hand, her face expressionless. The deputy crumpled to the floor and did not move again. For a moment no one breathed. Then chaos erupted. The other deputies drew their weapons. Price shouted for everyone to hold their fire. Jesse dove for his rifle, and Elijah threw himself in front of Kaiti, his arms spread wide. "Wait!" he screamed. "Everyone just wait!" Somehow, miraculously, no one fired. The room held suspended in that terrible moment, balanced on the knife edge between violence and restraint. Price moved to Frank's body and checked for a pulse. When he looked up, his face was grim, but not surprised. "He is dead." "He was going to shoot Virgil," Kaiti said calmly. "I could not allow that." "You just killed a federal deputy," one of the other lawmen said, his voice shaking. "That is a hanging offense." Price stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Kaiti. "Yes, it is. Under normal circumstances, I would arrest you right now, and you would swing from a rope within the week." "So arrest me." "I would, except for one problem." Frank Dobbs drew his weapon on an unarmed civilian in direct violation of my orders. He was attempting to commit murder. What you did was defend that civilian's life. In the eyes of the law, that is justifiable homicide. The other deputies stared at their marshal in disbelief. "Sir, you cannot be serious." "I am completely serious. Dobbs went rogue. He disobeyed a direct order and attempted to kill a man who was not resisting arrest. If anything, this woman did us a service by stopping him before he could do more harm." Price holstered his weapon and gestured for his men to do the same. Slowly, reluctantly, they complied. The marshal moved to the door and paused on the threshold, looking back at the bizarre tableau, Elijah still standing protectively in front of Kaiti Virgil, with his arm around Jesse, the body of Frank Dobbs cooling on the floor. "I was never here," Price said quietly. "None of us were. As far as anyone knows, Deputy Dobbs rode out on his own, and we have not seen him since. He probably got drunk and fell off his horse somewhere. It happens." "Marshal," one of the other deputies protested, but Price silenced him with a look. "We are leaving, now, and if any of you ever speak of what happened here tonight, I will personally see to it that you spend the rest of your lives breaking rocks in a territorial prison. Am I understood?" The deputies nodded, their faces pale, and filed out of the house. Price was the last to leave. He paused in the doorway and looked back at Elijah. "Take care of them, Morgan. All of them. And for God's sake, get that woman and the child across the border before Reed shows up." Then he was gone, and the sound of horses fading into the night was the sweetest music Elijah had ever heard. The silence after the marshal's departure was broken only by the crackling of the fire and Jesse's ragged breathing. The young man had sunk into a chair, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with reaction. Virgil stood behind him, one hand on his son's shoulder, staring at nothing. Kaede had not moved from where she stood, the pistol still in her hand, a thin trail of smoke curling from its barrel. Her face was carved from stone, but Elijah could see the tension in her shoulders, could see the way her hand trembled almost imperceptibly. "You killed a man," Elijah said quietly. "I have killed before." "That is not what I mean. You killed a man to save Virgil. You did not have to do that. You could have stayed hidden, let things play out, but you chose to put yourself at risk." Kaede finally looked at him, and there was something raw in her eyes, something vulnerable that she had not shown before. He was going to shoot Virgil. Virgil, who is the husband of the woman who taught me that my size was a blessing, not a curse. How could I stand by and watch him die? Most people would have. Most people would have protected themselves first. Then I am not most people. No, Elijah thought. You are not. The sound of a child crying came from the back room, and Kaede's demeanor changed instantly. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by fierce protectiveness. She moved toward the hallway, but Elijah caught her arm. "Wait, we need to deal with this first." He gestured to Frank Dobbs's body. Virgil stirred, coming back to himself. "Elijah is right. We cannot leave him here. If Reed shows up and finds a dead deputy, he will arrest all of us." "Where do we take him?" Jesse asked, his voice hoarse. "There is a ravine about a mile from here," Elijah said. "Deep enough that if we put him at the bottom, the scavengers will take care of the rest. By the time anyone finds him, if they ever do, there will not be enough left to identify." It was grim work, made grimmer by the fact that they had to do it quickly. They wrapped Frank's body in an old tarp from the barn, loaded it onto a horse, and Elijah and Virgil rode out into the darkness, while Jesse stayed behind to watch over Kaede and Little Sparrow. The night was bitterly cold, the stars sharp and merciless overhead, and neither man spoke as they made their way to the ravine. When they reached the edge, they dismounted and carried the body to the rim. For a moment they stood there looking down into the darkness below. "I never thought I would be disposing of a lawman's body," Virgil said quietly. "I never thought I would be harboring wanted fugitives, but here we are." "Do you think Price will keep his word about not reporting us?" Elijah considered the question. "Yes. Edmund Price is many things, but he is not a liar. If he says he was never here, then as far as the world is concerned, he was never here." They pushed the body over the edge and listened to it crash down through the rocks and brush. When the sound finally stopped, they stood in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. "Elijah," Virgil said finally, "why are you doing this? Why are you risking everything for a woman you barely know and a child who is not your responsibility?" It was a fair question, and Elijah found he did not have a simple answer. "When Catherine died, I blamed myself. I thought if I had been there, if I had been paying more attention, I could have stopped her. I carried that guilt for 3 years. Then Mary died, and I knew it was my fault because I chose duty over her safety. I have spent my whole life making the wrong choices, Virgil. I have spent my whole life being the kind of man who does what he is told instead of what he knows is right. Maybe I am trying to be different. Maybe I am trying to prove to myself that I can be better than I have been. Or maybe, Virgil said gently, you are just a good man who has been too hard on himself for too long. They rode back to the house in silence, and when they arrived they found Jessie teaching little Sparrow how to play checkers using buttons from Virgil's sewing kit. The child was giggling, her earlier fear forgotten in the simple joy of the game. Kaiti sat nearby watching with a soft expression that transformed her entire face. When she saw Elijah and Virgil return, she stood. "It is done. It is done." "Then we should leave. We have brought enough trouble to your house." But Virgil shook his head. "You cannot leave tonight. It is too cold, too dark, and Captain Reed is still out there somewhere. Stay until morning. Rest. Eat. We will help you plan a route to the border that avoids the army patrols." Kaiti looked uncertain, but little Sparrow had already climbed into her lap, yawning hugely, and the sight of the tired child seemed to make the decision for her. "Very well, but we leave at first light." They ate together, a strange family thrown together by circumstance and necessity. Jessie made stew while Virgil told stories about his time as a buffalo soldier, stories that made even Kaiti smile. Little Sparrow fell asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms, and Kaiti carried her to the back room where Elijah had set up a makeshift bed. Later, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Elijah found himself sitting by the fire with Kaiti. She had emerged from the back room to check the locks on the doors and windows, her warrior's instincts not allowing her to fully rest, even in relative safety. "You should sleep," Elijah said. "You need your strength for tomorrow." "I'm not used to sleeping in houses. They feel like traps." "I understand, but you are safe here, at least for tonight." Kaiti settled into the chair across from him, her long legs stretched toward the fire. In the flickering light, her face looked younger, less hardened by the weight of all she had endured. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly. "Mary. You have mentioned her, but you have never said how she died." Elijah felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the one that always came when he thought about Mary. "It was 3 years ago. She was 7 months pregnant with our first child. There were reports of Apache raiders in the area, and I was ordered to evacuate all civilians to the fort. Mary did not want to go. She said the journey would be too hard on her, that the baby would come early if she was jolted around in a wagon. But I insisted. I told her it was for her own safety, that I could not protect her if she stayed." He paused, the memory as sharp and painful as broken glass. "She went into labor on the 2nd day of the journey. The baby came too soon and there was too much blood. By the time we got her to the fort, it was too late. The doctor said if she had stayed home, if she had been able to rest and deliver in a comfortable bed, she might have survived. But I had forced her to go. I had chosen to follow orders instead of listening to what my wife needed, and because of that both she and our son died." Kaiti was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "You blame yourself for her death. I am responsible for her death. There is a difference." "Is there?" "You made a choice based on the information you had at the time. You thought you were protecting her. How is that different from what I do every day with little Sparrow? I make choices that could get her killed, and I make them because I think they are the best way to keep her safe. If I am wrong, if one of my choices leads to her death, will I be responsible, or will I simply be guilty of being human?" Elijah looked at her, surprised by the compassion in her voice. "You are very wise for someone so young." "I am not young. I have seen more death than most people see in a lifetime. That ages a person in ways that have nothing to do with years." They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Finally Kaiti spoke again. "When I killed that deputy tonight, I did not hesitate. I saw the gun in his hand, I saw it pointing at Virgil, and I acted. But now, sitting here in the quiet, I keep seeing his face, the surprise in his eyes when he realized he had been shot. He was young, maybe Jesse's age. He probably had a family somewhere, people who loved him and will wonder what happened to him." "He made his choice when he drew his weapon," Elijah said. "You gave him a chance to stand down. He refused." "I know, but knowing that does not make it easier." "No, it does not. And the day it becomes easy is the day you should worry about losing your humanity." Kaiti looked at him, and in her eyes he saw a reflection of his own pain, his own guilt, his own desperate desire to believe that he was still capable of being good despite all the terrible things he had done. "Why do you look at me that way?" she asked quietly. "What way?" "Like you are trying to solve a puzzle, like you cannot quite figure out what I am." Elijah felt heat rise in his face. "I am sorry. I did not mean to make you uncomfortable." "You do not make me uncomfortable. You make me curious. You are not like the other white men I have known. You listen when I speak. You do not treat me like I am a child or a savage or something to be pitied. You look at me like I am a person." "You are a person. I know that, but most people do not. Most people see the color of my skin or the size of my body, and they decide they know everything about me before I ever open my mouth. You did not do that. Even when you first saw me in that cave, even when you knew I was Apache, and you had every reason to hate me, you did not look at me with contempt. You looked at me with curiosity." "I suppose," Elijah said slowly, "that after everything I have seen and done, I have learned that the world is not as simple as we are taught to believe. I have learned that good people can do terrible things, and terrible people can have moments of grace. I have learned that the line between right and wrong is often blurry, and that certainty is the luxury of those who have never been forced to make impossible choices." Kaiti nodded slowly. "Ayanna used to say something similar. She said that the white man's world was built on the idea that things could be divided into clean categories, good and evil, civilized and savage, human and animal. But the real world is messier than that. The real world is all the shades in between." She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. That is why they killed her. The fire had burned down to coals, now casting the room in a warm red glow. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows and moaning through the eaves. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called out its voice, lonely and wild. "We should sleep," Elijah said, though he made no move to stand. "Captain Reed could arrive at any time, and we need to be ready." But Kaiti shook her head. "I cannot sleep. Every time I close my eyes I see that deputy's face. I see the blood spreading across his chest. I hear the sound he made when he fell." "That will fade with time." "Will it? Or will it join all the other faces I see when I try to sleep? The soldiers I killed when they attacked our village, the men who tried to capture Little Sparrow, all the ghosts that follow me wherever I go." Elijah understood that burden all too well. They never truly leave, but you learn to carry them. You learn to accept that they are part of who you are now, part of the price you paid to survive, and you try to be worthy of that survival by making choices that honor the life you have been given. Kaiti looked at him for a long moment, and then to his surprise she reached out and took his hand. Her palm was warm and calloused, her grip strong but gentle. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me, for protecting me, for being the kind of man who chooses to help rather than harm." Elijah felt something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen for 3 years suddenly beginning to thaw. He looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of his pale skin against her darker complexion, and felt a connection he had not expected, had not been looking for, but could not deny. "You are welcome," he said, his voice rough with emotion he did not quite understand. They sat like that for a while, hands clasped, watching the dying fire paint shadows on the walls. And for the first time since Mary had died, Elijah allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than his mistakes. That maybe he could be worthy of the second chance that life seemed to be offering him. The moment was shattered by the sound of horses approaching. Many horses moving fast, coming from the direction of the fort. Captain Reed had arrived. Elijah and Kaiti were on their feet instantly, their moment of connection forgotten in the rush of adrenaline. Virgil and Jesse emerged from their rooms, rifles in hand, their faces grim. Little Sparrow appeared in the doorway of the back room, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "How many?" Virgil asked, moving to the window. Elijah peered out through the curtain. 20, maybe more. Soldiers from Fort Huachuca by the look of their uniforms. "We cannot fight that many." Jesse said, his voice tight with fear. No, Elijah agreed. We cannot. Kaiti moved to the back room and gathered little Sparrow in her arms. The child clung to her, suddenly wide awake and frightened. There is a root cellar, she said to Elijah. I saw it earlier. Is there another way out? Yes, but it opens up near the barn. If they surround the house, they will see you. Then what do you suggest? Before Elijah could answer, a voice rang out from outside, young and arrogant and filled with self-importance. This is Captain Jonathan Reed of the United States Army. I know you have Apache fugitives in there. Send them out now and no one else has to be hurt. Elijah and Virgil exchanged a glance. Then Elijah moved to the door and opened it just enough to be heard. Captain Reed, there are no fugitives here, just law-abiding citizens. Do not lie to me, Morgan. We have reports from town that a giant Apache woman was seen heading this direction. If you are harboring her, you are guilty of treason. The only people here are myself, Virgil Kane, and his son Jesse. If you want to search the property, you can come back in the morning with a proper warrant. There was a pause, and then Reed's voice came back dripping with contempt. I do not need a warrant to search for Apache fugitives. They are enemy combatants, not citizens. Now send them out, or I will burn this house to the ground with everyone in it. It was not an idle threat. Elijah had known Reed during the war. The man was ambitious to the point of recklessness, willing to do anything that might advance his career. If he thought capturing Chief Nietzsche's granddaughter would get him promoted, he would happily kill anyone who stood in his way. Kaiti had come to stand beside Elijah, little Sparrow still in her arms. Let me go, she said quietly. Give him what he wants. I can survive prison, but little Sparrow needs to live. No, Elijah said firmly. This is not your choice to make. Yes, it is. You saved my life. You saved Virgil's life. Now let me save yours. He turned back to the door and called out, Captain Reed, I challenge you to a duel, single combat hand-to-hand. If I win, you leave and never come back. If you win, you can search the house and take anyone you find. There was a long silence. Then Reed's laughter echoed across the yard, harsh and mocking. You must be joking, Morgan. You are wounded and half dead. I would kill you in minutes. Then you have nothing to fear, unless you are afraid to fight a wounded man. The laughter stopped. Elijah could almost feel Reed's anger radiating through the darkness. The captain was proud, and having his courage questioned in front of his men would sting. Very well, Reed called back. Single combat it is. But when I win, I am taking everyone in that house, the Apache woman, the child, and all of you for obstruction of justice. Agreed, Elijah lied. He had no intention of honoring that bargain if he lost. Better to die fighting than to watch Kaiti and little Sparrow be dragged away in chains. He turned to find Kaiti staring at him in disbelief. What are you doing? You cannot beat him. You said yourself you are wounded and weak. I know. Then why? Elijah looked at her, at this woman who had shown him that strength and gentleness could exist in the same person, that it was possible to be both warrior and protector, both fierce and kind. He thought about all the times he had chosen duty over humanity, all the times he had followed orders instead of his heart. This time would be different. This time he would choose what was right instead of what was easy. Because, he said simply, you are worth fighting for. Then he stepped out into the cold night air to face Captain Jonathan Reed, knowing that he was probably walking to his death, but feeling more alive than he had in 3 years. The yard between the house and the barn had been trampled by 20 horses into a rough circle of frozen mud and snow. Soldiers ringed the perimeter, their rifles held at the ready, their faces lit by torches that cast dancing shadows across the night. In the center of that circle stood Captain Jonathan Reed, removing his uniform jacket with slow, deliberate movements designed to show his confidence. Elijah walked forward on unsteady legs, his wounded shoulder screaming with every step. The cold bit through his shirt, but he barely felt it. All his attention was focused on the man waiting for him, on calculating his chances, on finding some way to turn his weakness into an advantage. Reed was in his early 30s, tall and lean, with the kind of hardened muscle that came from years of military discipline. His face was sharp and angular, his eyes bright with ambition and cruelty. He had the look of a man who had spent his entire life proving he was better than everyone around him and who had learned to enjoy the proving. "This is your last chance to surrender, Morgan," Reed called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Give me the Apache woman and the child, and I will let you and your friends live." "Go to hell," Elijah replied, and was gratified to see Reed's jaw tighten with anger. The captain handed his jacket to one of his soldiers and began rolling up his sleeves. "I want everyone here to witness this. I want it known that Elijah Morgan chose to fight rather than do his duty as a citizen of the United States. When I beat him, when I break him, let it be remembered that he brought this on himself." Behind Elijah, the door of the house opened, and Virgil stepped out, followed by Jesse. They took up positions on either side of the door, their rifles visible but not raised, a warning to Reed's men that if this went badly there would be consequences. Inside through the window, Elijah could see Kaiete's face pressed against the glass. Little Sparrow clutched in her arms. The expression on her face was one he had never seen before. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something that made his chest ache and his resolve harden. "The rules are simple," Reed announced, pacing the circle like a prize fighter. "No weapons, no outside interference. The fight continues until one man yields or is unable to continue. If Morgan wins, I withdraw and report that we found no fugitives here. If I win, I search the house and arrest anyone I find who is not a United States citizen." "Agreed," Elijah said, though he had no intention of letting Reed search anything if it came to that. Reed took up a fighting stance, his hands raised, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet. He had been trained in hand-to-hand combat by the Army, and it showed in every line of his body. Elijah, by contrast, felt clumsy and slow, his shoulder wound robbing him of strength and mobility on his left side. This was going to be a short fight. Reed attacked first, coming in fast with a combination of punches aimed at Elijah's head and body. Elijah managed to block the first two, but the third caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. He stumbled backward, his boots slipping on the frozen ground, and Reed followed up with a kick that caught him in the thigh and sent him sprawling. The soldiers cheered. Reed grinned, circling slowly, giving Elijah time to get up. Playing with him, showing everyone watching that this was not even going to be a contest. Elijah pushed himself to his feet, tasting blood where he had bitten his tongue. His ribs throbbed and his leg felt like it had been hit with a hammer, but he forced himself to stand straight to meet Reed's eyes without flinching. "Is that all you have, Morgan?" Catherine must be ashamed, watching from hell and seeing how weak her brother turned out to be. The words were designed to provoke, to make Elijah angry and reckless, and it worked. Rage flooded through him, hot and overwhelming, and he charged forward with a roar that came from somewhere deep in his gut. Reed sidestepped easily and brought his elbow down on the back of Elijah's neck as he passed. Elijah went down hard, his face plowing into the frozen mud, stars exploding behind his eyes. He heard laughter from the soldiers, heard Reed's voice taunting him, heard his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. "Get up," he told himself. "Get up, or Kaite dies. Get up, or Little Sparrow is dragged to a reservation and left to rot. Get up because you promised you would be better than you have been. Get up because this time you are choosing right over easy." He got up. Reed's smile faltered slightly. He had expected Elijah to stay down, or at least to take longer to rise. But here was the broken man standing again, blood streaming from his nose, his eyes blazing with determination that bordered on madness. "You should have stayed down," Reed said, and attacked again. This time Elijah was ready. He let Reed's first punch slide past his guard, accepting a glancing blow to his cheek in exchange for the opportunity to grab Reed's arm. He used the captain's own momentum against him, pulling him forward and off balance, then drove his knee up into Reed's stomach. The captain grunted in pain and tried to pull away, but Elijah held on, driving his knee up again and again, each impact sending shock waves of agony through his wounded shoulder, but also doing real damage to Reed. When he finally released his grip, Reed stumbled backward, his face flushed, his breathing labored. The soldiers had gone quiet. This was not how it was supposed to go. Reed straightened, anger replacing his earlier confidence. He came at Elijah again, but this time there was no showboating, no playing to the crowd. He fought with the cold efficiency of a trained killer, his fists seeking vulnerable points, his feet sweeping at Elijah's legs, trying to put him down and keep him down. They traded blows in the center of the circle, neither giving ground, both taking damage. Elijah's world narrowed to the immediate moment, to the pattern of Reed's attacks, to the openings that appeared and disappeared in the space of a heartbeat. His shoulder was on fire and he could feel blood soaking through his bandage, but he pushed the pain aside, focused everything on surviving the next second and the next and the next. Reed landed a solid punch to Elijah's wounded shoulder, and Elijah screamed a sound of pure agony that cut through the night. His left arm went dead, hanging useless at his side. Reed saw his advantage and pressed it, hammering at the wounded shoulder with brutal precision. Elijah went to one knee, his vision blurring his body, begging him to give up. Through the haze of pain he saw Kaede at the window, saw little Sparrow's frightened face, saw Virgil and Jesse tensing to intervene despite the rifles pointed their way. Reed grabbed Elijah by his hair and pulled his head back, exposing his throat. "Yield," the captain hissed. "Yield, and I will make it quick." Elijah looked up at him through blood and sweat and pain, and he smiled. "Go to hell." Then he drove his right fist up between Reed's legs with everything he had left. Reed's eyes went wide. His grip on Elijah's hair went slack. He made a sound like a deflating bellows and crumpled to the ground, curling into a ball, his face turning an interesting shade of purple. The soldiers stood frozen, unsure what to do. Their captain was down, but the fight was not technically over. Reed had not yielded, and neither had Elijah. Elijah forced himself to stand swaying like a tree in a high wind. He looked down at Reed, at the man who had threatened to burn down his home and drag Kaede away in chains, and he felt nothing but a vast, hollow exhaustion. "Yield," he said quietly. Reed gasped something that might have been agreement, might have been a curse. Elijah did not care. He turned away from the captain and walked toward the house on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. He made it 3 steps before the world tilted sideways and he felt darkness rushing up to claim him. The last thing he heard before unconsciousness took him was Kaede's voice screaming his name. When Elijah woke, he was lying on his own bed, staring up at the familiar ceiling beams he had installed 3 years ago when he first built this house. For a moment he could not remember how he had gotten here, could not remember anything beyond the feel of Reed's fists hammering into his body. Then it all came flooding back. The duel, the pain, the desperate struggle to stay standing long enough to win. Had he won? He tried to sit up, and his body informed him in no uncertain terms that this was a terrible idea. Pain radiated from his shoulder in waves that made him dizzy and nauseous. His ribs felt like someone had used them for firewood. His face was a mass of bruises, and his left eye was swollen nearly shut. But he was alive. The door opened, and Kaede entered carrying a basin of water and clean bandages. When she saw he was awake, something flickered across her face too quickly for him to read. Relief, maybe, or anger. Possibly both. "You are an idiot," she said, setting the basin down on the table beside the bed with more force than necessary. "Did we win?" "You won, barely." Captain Reed ordered his men to retreat, but not before informing everyone within earshot that he would be back with twice as many soldiers and a warrant for everyone's arrest. "You have bought us time, nothing more." "How much time?" "A day, maybe 2. Reed has to ride back to Fort Huachuca, make his report, gather more men. But he will come back. Men like him always do." Elijah tried to sit up again, and this time Kaede moved to help him, her strong hands gentle as she propped him against the headboard. The simple kindness of the gesture made his throat tight. "Where is everyone else?" he asked. "Virgil and Jesse are preparing supplies for our journey. We leave tonight." "Tonight you are not ready. Your wound. My wound will heal or it will not. But we cannot stay here any longer. We have put you and Virgil in enough danger." She began unwrapping the old bandage from his shoulder, her movements brisk and efficient. When she saw the state of the wound underneath, her face tightened. The stitches had torn open during the fight and fresh blood seeped from the ragged edges. "This needs to be cleaned and restitched," she said. "It will hurt. Everything hurts. A little more will not make much difference." She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with water that had been boiled and mixed with something that smelled sharp and medicinal. Elijah gritted his teeth against the pain, watching her face as she concentrated on her work. There was a vertical line between her eyebrows when she focused, he noticed. It made her look stern and beautiful at the same time. "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly, not looking up from her work. "Do what?" "Fight Reed. Risk your life. You could have just let us go. Let us run and take our chances. But instead you challenged him to a duel you had almost no chance of winning." "Why?" Elijah was quiet for a moment, trying to find words for something he did not fully understand himself. "When Catherine died, I told myself it was not my fault. She had made her own choices. I could not have known she would take her own life. But the truth is I did know. I saw the signs. I saw how she was struggling, how the memories were eating her alive. And I did nothing because doing something would have been hard. It would have required me to be vulnerable, to admit that I did not have all the answers, to ask for help." He paused, wincing, as Kaidi began stitching the wound closed. "When Mary died, I told myself it was bad luck. A tragedy that could not have been prevented. But that was a lie, too. I could have prevented it. I could have listened to her when she said she was not strong enough for the journey. I could have put her needs above my duty to follow orders. But I did not, because following orders was easier than making the hard choice." Kaidi had stopped stitching and was looking at him now, her dark eyes intent. "I am tired of taking the easy path," Elijah continued. "I am tired of doing what I am told instead of what I know is right. You asked me why I fought Reed. I fought him because for the first time in 3 years I had a chance to choose what mattered over what was safe. I fought him because you are worth fighting for, because Little Sparrow deserves a chance at life, because sometimes the only way to prove you are more than your worst moments is to risk everything on being better." Kaidi's hand trembled slightly as she tied off the last stitch. When she spoke, her voice was rough with emotion. "You could have died." "Yes. You should have died. Reed is younger, stronger, better trained. You won through sheer stubbornness and luck." "I know." "Then you are impossible," she said softly. But there was no heat in her words, and when she looked at him there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch, something that looked almost like tenderness. "Maybe," Elijah said softly, "but I am alive, and so are you. And that seems like a fair trade to me." They stayed like that for a long moment, eyes locked, the space between them charged with something neither of them had the words to name. Then Kaidi cleared her throat and stood busying herself with putting away the medical supplies. "You need to rest," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "We have a long night ahead of us." "Tell me the plan." "Virgil says there is a pass through the mountains that will take us south toward the border. It is rarely patrolled because the terrain is too rough for wagons. If we travel light and fast, we can be across the border in 3 days. And then we disappear into Mexico. There are Apache communities in the Sierra Madre who will take us in. We will be safe there." Safe. The word hung in the air between them, and they both knew it was not quite true. There was no real safety for Apache anymore, not in Mexico, not anywhere. But it was the best they could hope for. "I am going with you," Elijah said. Kaidi turned to stare at him. "What?" "You heard me. I am going with you to the border." "No, absolutely not. You can barely stand, you can barely move. You will slow us down and put everyone in danger. Then I will be slow and dangerous. But I am going." "Why?" "Your debt to me is paid. You fought Reed, you won. You gave us the time we need to escape. You do not owe us anything more." Elijah met her eyes steadily. "This is not about debt. This is about choosing who I want to be. And I want to be the kind of man who sees things through to the end, who does not just point someone towards safety and wish them luck. Who stands with the people he cares about no matter how hard it gets." Something flickered across Kaidi's face there and gone too quickly for him to read. "You care about us?" "Yes," Elijah said simply. "I do." Kaidi turned away, but not before he saw the way her jaw tightened, the way she blinked rapidly as if fighting back tears. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "No one has ever fought for me before, not like this. People have fought against me, feared me, tried to use me, but no one has ever just stood up and said I am worth protecting." Then those people were fools. She looked back at him, and the vulnerability in her face was almost painful to witness. What happens when we reach the border? What happens when Little Sparrow is safe and there is no more immediate danger? What happens to this thing between us? Elijah had been asking himself the same question. He did not have a good answer. "I do not know, but I would like the chance to find out." Before Kaidi could respond, the door burst open and Jesse came running in, his face pale with panic. "They are coming back. Reed is coming back right now with at least 40 soldiers." Elijah and Kaidi were on their feet instantly, pain forgotten in the rush of adrenaline. They rushed to the window and looked out to see torches in the distance moving toward the house in a long, glittering line like a river of fire. "How long?" Elijah asked. 10 minutes, maybe less. They are riding hard." Virgil appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. "The horses are saddled and ready. We need to leave right now." But Kaidi was shaking her head, her face set in hard lines. "There is no time. If we run now, they will catch us in the open. We need to make a stand here." "We cannot fight 40 soldiers," Virgil protested. "We do not need to fight them all. We just need to hold them long enough for Little Sparrow to get away." Elijah understood what she was saying, understood the calculation she was making. She would sacrifice herself to buy time for the child. It was what she had been prepared to do all along. "No," he said firmly. "We all leave together, or we all stay together. Do not be stupid. You cannot move fast enough to outrun them, and I will not leave Little Sparrow behind." "Then we make them an offer they cannot refuse." Everyone turned to look at him. "What kind of offer?" Virgil asked. Elijah's mind was racing, turning over possibilities, discarding options, looking for the one angle that might save them all. Then it hit him, a desperate idea, born of exhaustion and pain and the sudden clarity that comes when there are no good choices left. "Reed does not want us," he said slowly. "He wants Little Sparrow. She is the prize, the thing that will get him promoted and celebrated. Everything else is secondary. So we give her to him." Jesse's voice was sharp with disbelief. "No. We make him think we are going to give her to him. We make him come close, make him confident. And then we take him hostage." Kaidi's eyes went wide. "You want to capture an army captain surrounded by 40 armed soldiers? I want to create a situation where he has to choose between getting his prize and getting himself killed. Men like Reed, they are ambitious. They want glory, but they also want to live to enjoy it. If we can convince him that continuing this pursuit will cost him his life, he will back down." It was a terrible plan, full of holes and dependent on luck and timing, and Reed being exactly the kind of man Elijah thought he was. But it was the only plan they had. Virgil was nodding slowly. "It could work, but we would need bait, something to draw him in close." "I will be the bait," Kaidi said immediately. "I will walk out there and surrender. When Reed comes to take me into custody, you grab him." "No," Elijah said again. "If something goes wrong, if the soldiers panic and start shooting, you will be the first one dead." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest I walk out there. I am wounded, no threat. I will tell Reed I want to negotiate. While he is focused on me, you circle around behind him." "That is insane. You can barely walk." "Which is why he will not see me as a threat. It is perfect." They argued for another minute, but time was running out and they all knew it. Finally, Kaidi threw up her hands in frustration. "Fine, we do it your way. But if you get yourself killed, I will never forgive you." "Fair enough." They moved quickly, each person taking up their position. Virgil and Jesse at the windows with rifles. Kaidi slipping out the back door to work her way around to the barn. Little Sparrow hidden in the root cellar beneath the kitchen, wrapped in blankets and told to be absolutely silent no matter what she heard. Elijah walked out the front door just as the first of Reed's soldiers came into view. He held his hands up, showing he was unarmed, and walked slowly toward the approaching force. Captain Reed reined in his horse when he saw Elijah, his face twisting with anger and something that might have been grudging respect. "Morgan, I told you I would be back." "I know, and I am here to make you an offer." Reed dismounted, signaling his men to stay back. He walked forward until he was standing 10 feet from Elijah, close enough to talk without shouting far enough to draw his sidearm if needed. "What kind of offer?" Reed asked suspiciously. "Let us go, all of us, and in exchange I will tell you where Chief Nietzsche is hiding." Reed's eyes narrowed. "Why would you know that?" "Because the Apache woman told me. She has been in contact with him trying to arrange safe passage for his granddaughter. He is in the Sierra Madre in a canyon called Cañón de los Embudos. If you move fast, you can get there before he relocates." It was a complete lie. Elijah had no idea where Nietzsche was, and he doubted Kaiti did either. But Reed did not need to know that. He just needed to be tempted, needed to think there might be an even bigger prize waiting if he just let them go. Reed considered the offer, his ambitious mind clearly working through the angles. Capturing Nietzsche would be worth far more than capturing his granddaughter. It would make Reed a genuine hero, the man who finally ended the Apache Wars once and for all. "How do I know you are telling the truth?" Reed asked. "You do not, but what do you have to lose by checking, 'Let us go verify my information'? If I am lying, you can always come back and arrest us later. But if I am telling the truth, you will be the man who caught Geronimo's successor." Reed took a step closer, and Elijah saw the moment the captain made his decision, saw the greed and ambition win out over caution. Reed opened his mouth to speak, probably to accept the deal. That was when Kaiti emerged from the shadows behind him and pressed the barrel of a rifle against the back of his head. "Do not move," she said quietly. "Do not speak. Do not even breathe too loudly." Reed froze his face, going pale. Around them 40 soldiers raised their weapons, but no one fired. They could not without risking hitting their captain. Elijah walked forward and took Reed's pistol from its holster. "Here is what is going to happen, Captain. You are going to order your men to stand down and ride back to the fort. You are going to tell them that you made a deal with us, that we gave you information in exchange for safe passage, and you are going to let us leave. And if I refuse," Reed's voice was tight with controlled fury, "then the Apache woman who is currently holding a rifle to your head will pull the trigger, and your brains will be decorating the ground before your body hits the dirt. Then my friends in the house will start shooting, and a lot of your men will die. Maybe they will kill us eventually, but you will not be around to see it." Kaiti pressed the rifle harder against Reed's skull. "Choose quickly. My arms are getting tired." For a long moment Reed did not move. Elijah could see him calculating, trying to find some way out of this that did not involve his humiliation or death. But there was no way out. He had walked into the trap, and now he had to decide if his pride was worth more than his life. "Stand down," Reed called out, his voice breaking slightly. "Everyone stand down. That is an order." The soldiers lowered their weapons, confusion and anger clear on their faces. One of them, a sergeant with gray in his hair, called out, "Sir, we can take them. We have the numbers." "I said stand down, Sergeant. We are leaving." Elijah slowly backed away, keeping Reed's pistol trained on the captain. Kaiti did the same, the rifle never wavering from its target. They made it to the porch before Reed spoke again. "This is not over, Morgan. I will hunt you for the rest of your life if I have to." "Then I guess you will be hunting for a long time," Elijah replied, "because I do not plan on being found." Reed mounted his horse with as much dignity as he could muster, which was not much. He turned the animal toward the fort and began riding away, his men following in confused silence. They watched until the torches disappeared into the night, until the sound of hoofbeats faded to nothing. Only then did Elijah let himself breathe. Kaiti lowered her rifle, and he saw that her hands were shaking. "That was the stupidest, most reckless, most insane thing I have ever been part of." Did it work? Yes, it worked. This time. But what happens the next time Reed comes back, or the time after that? We cannot keep running forever. Elijah looked at her, at this woman who had already run for so long, who had sacrificed so much to protect one small child, and he made a decision. Then maybe it is time to stop running. The journey to the border took 4 days instead of 3. Elijah's injuries slowed them down, and they had to take a circuitous route to avoid Army patrols that seemed to be everywhere, stirred up by Reed's reports. But finally, on a cold morning with frost on the ground and their breath steaming in the air, they stood on a ridge looking down at the thin ribbon of the Rio Grande that marked the boundary between the United States and Mexico. Little Sparrow had grown quieter as they traveled, the constant fear and movement wearing on her in ways that showed in her eyes even when she tried to smile. Kaiti carried her most of the time now, the child clinging to her like a burr, seeking comfort in the one constant presence in her chaotic life. Virgil and Jesse had come with them, refusing to let Elijah make the journey alone. They had become a strange family over these past days, bound together by shared danger and the simple human need for connection in a hostile world. Now they stood together on that ridge looking at the end of their journey, and no one seemed eager to take the final steps. "There is a village about 5 miles south of the river," Virgil said, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. "Apache village, one of the hidden ones that the Mexican government pretends not to know about. They will take you in Kaiti. You and Little Sparrow will be safe there." Kaiti nodded, but her eyes were on Elijah, searching his face for something. "What about you? What will you do?" It was the question he had been avoiding for 4 days, the question that had kept him awake at night while the others slept, staring at the stars and trying to figure out what came next. "I do not know," he admitted. "I cannot go back to my ranch. Reed knows where I live, and he will come back eventually. I could go north, start over somewhere new. Montana maybe, or the Dakota Territories." Alone. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Elijah looked at Kaiti, really looked at her, seeing not just the warrior who had saved his life or the protector who had sacrificed everything for a child. He saw the woman who had cleaned his wounds and stayed up with him when the pain was too much to sleep. He saw the person who had shared her fears and her grief and her small moments of hope. He saw someone who had become important to him in a way he did not fully understand but could not deny. "That depends," he said quietly. "On what? On whether you want to spend the rest of your life running and hiding, on whether you think there might be another way." Kaiti frowned. "What other way is there? I am Apache. That makes me a fugitive in the eyes of the law. There is no place in your world for someone like me." "Maybe not in the world as it exists now, but worlds change. People change. 3 weeks ago I was a broken man, living alone in a house full of ghosts, convinced that I deserved my misery because of all the terrible things I had done. Now I am standing here wounded and wanted by the army, and I have never felt more alive." He stepped closer to her, aware of Virgil and Jesse politely looking away, giving them this moment of privacy. "You changed me, Kaiti. You showed me that it is possible to be strong and gentle at the same time, that it is possible to carry pain and still choose kindness, that it is possible to have done terrible things and still be worthy of redemption. I do not want to lose that. I do not want to lose you." Kaiti's eyes had grown bright with unshed tears. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that if you have to disappear into Mexico, I want to disappear with you. I am saying that I would rather spend the rest of my life as a fugitive with you than live in safety and comfort without you. I am saying that somewhere along the way, between the cave and the duel and all the moments in between, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the cold morning air, impossible to take back, impossible to ignore. Kaiti stared at him, her breath coming fast, her hands clenched at her sides. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough. I know you are brave and fierce and would die to protect someone you love. I know you see the good in people even when they cannot see it in themselves. I know that when you smile, really smile, it feels like the sun coming out from behind clouds. I know that I have not felt this way since Mary died, and I do not want to let it go just because it is complicated or dangerous or makes no logical sense." A single tear tracked down Kaiti's cheek. "I cannot give you a normal life. I cannot give you safety or security or any of the things a wife is supposed to provide. I do not want normal. I tried normal, and it left me hollow and broken. I want real. I want honest. I want you." Kaiti looked down at little Sparrow, who had been watching this exchange with wide, curious eyes. The child said something in Apache, and Kaiti responded in the same language, her voice thick with emotion. Then she looked back at Elijah. "Little Sparrow says you have kind eyes. She says she can tell you are a good man because you look at me the way her grandfather used to look at her grandmother, like I am precious instead of frightening. She is a very wise child. She is, and she has already lost too much. If I do this, if I let you come with us, you become part of her life. You become family. And if something happens, if you change your mind or decide this is too hard, it will break her heart. It will break my heart." Elijah knelt down so he was at eye level with little Sparrow. The child looked at him solemnly, her small face grave beyond her years. "Little Sparrow," he said in his halting Apache, hoping he was getting the words right, "I promise I will protect you and Kaiti with my life. I promise I will not leave unless you tell me to go. I promise to be family if you will have me." Little Sparrow studied him for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his face with one small hand, tracing the bruises Reed had left. She said something in Apache, and Kaiti translated, her voice breaking. "She says you are hurt because you fought for us. She says that makes you braver than any warrior she has ever known. She says she would be honored to have you as family." Elijah felt something break open in his chest, all the walls he had built around his heart crumbling to dust. He pulled little Sparrow into a gentle hug, felt her small arms wrap around his neck, and for the first time in 3 years he let himself cry. When he finally pulled back, he looked up at Kaiti. "So what do you say? Will you let me come with you? Will you give us a chance to see what we could be together?" Kaiti was crying now too, tears streaming down her face, all her careful armor stripped away to reveal the vulnerability underneath. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, you foolish, brave, impossible man. Yes." Elijah stood and pulled her into his arms. This woman who towered over him, who could break him in half if she wanted to, who held him like he was something precious and fragile. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, while Virgil and Jesse smiled and little Sparrow giggled with delight. Finally, Virgil cleared his throat. "Not to interrupt this touching moment, but we should probably get moving. Reed may have given up for now, but there are other patrols, and standing on a ridge in broad daylight is asking for trouble." They made their way down to the river, to the place where the water ran shallow enough to cross. On the far side was Mexico, was safety, was the possibility of a new beginning. But before they could cross, Jesse spoke up. "I want to come with you." Everyone turned to stare at him. Virgil's face went pale. "Son, what are you talking about?" "I want to go to Mexico. I want to find the Apache communities there, learn about that part of my heritage. Mom was Chiricahua, same as Kaiti. That means there are people down there who might have known her who can tell me about where I come from. I need to understand that part of myself." Virgil looked like he had been struck. "Jesse, you are my son. You do not need to go searching for some other identity." "I am not searching for another identity, Pa. I am searching for the complete one. You raised me to be proud of who I am, but you also kept half of my history hidden from me. I do not blame you for that. I understand why you did it. But now I know the truth, and I need to explore it. I need to understand all the pieces that make me who I am." Father and son stared at each other across the space of years and secrets and love that complicated everything. Finally, Virgil nodded, tears in his eyes. "You are right. You deserve to know your mother's people, to understand that part of yourself. But promise me you will be careful. Promise me you will come back someday." "I promise, Pa." They embraced, and Elijah had to look away, his own eyes stinging. This was what family looked like, he thought. Not just blood, but choice. Not just staying together out of obligation, but letting go out of love. When they finally pulled apart, Virgil turned to Elijah. "Take care of my boy, and take care of yourself. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." "What will you do?" Elijah asked. "Reed knows about you now. You cannot go back to your farm." Virgil smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Elijah had seen on his face in days. "I have been running and hiding for 15 years. I think it is time I stopped. I am going to go see Marshal Price, turn myself in, face whatever consequences come. Maybe the army will court-martial me, maybe they will just discharge me. Either way, I will finally be free of the secret I have been carrying all this time." "That is brave." "No, it is just tired. I am tired of being afraid. You taught me that, Elijah. You and Kaidi both. Sometimes the only way to be free is to stop running." They said their final goodbyes there on the bank of the Rio Grande, these people who had become family in the space of a few desperate weeks. Then Virgil turned his horse north and rode away, heading back toward whatever future waited for him, while Elijah, Kaidi, Jesse, and Little Sparrow waded across the shallow water into Mexico. The Apache village was exactly where Virgil had said it would be, a collection of traditional wickiups and a few adobe structures tucked into a canyon where the Mexican army rarely ventured. The people there were wary at first, these last survivors of a broken nation. But when they saw Little Sparrow, when the elders recognized her as Chief Naiche's granddaughter, they welcomed the travelers with open arms. An old woman, her face carved with wrinkles that spoke of a hard life lived with dignity, approached Kaidi and spoke to her in rapid Apache. Kaidi responded, gesturing to Elijah and Jesse, and the old woman's eyes went wide. She looked at Elijah for a long time, then said something that made Kaidi laugh, a sound he had never heard from her before, bright and joyous and full of life. "What did she say?" Elijah asked. "She said that you must be very brave or very stupid to love a woman who could break you like a twig. She said she cannot decide which, but either way, you are welcome here." The village gave them a small wickiup on the edge of the settlement, close enough to be part of the community but far enough to offer some privacy. It was not much, just a dome of branches covered with brush and hides, but it was warm and dry, and it was theirs. That first night, lying on a bed of furs with Kaidi beside him and Little Sparrow sleeping peacefully nearby, Elijah felt something he had not felt in 3 years. Peace. Not the absence of struggle or pain or fear, but the deep abiding knowledge that he was exactly where he needed to be with exactly the people he needed to be with. Kaidi shifted beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. "Really sure? Because there is still time to change your mind, to go back to your old life." Elijah thought about his ranch sitting empty in the Arizona wilderness. He thought about the life he had built there, the routines and rituals that had helped him survive after Mary's death. He thought about everything he was giving up by staying here. Then he thought about Kaiiti's smile, about Little Sparrow's laughter, about the possibility of building something new instead of mourning something lost. "I am sure," he said, "more sure than I have ever been about anything." They lay in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the village settling down for the night, the crackle of dying fires and the distant call of coyotes in the hills. "Elijah," Kaidi said softly. "Yes. Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for being brave enough to love someone the world says you should not love." Elijah rolled over to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Thank you for showing me that I could be more than my mistakes, that I could choose differently. That love was still possible even after everything I had done and lost." He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and she kissed him back with a fierceness that took his breath away. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying, but this time the tears were not from grief or pain. They were from joy, from relief, from the overwhelming gratitude of having found each other against all odds. They made love that night, slowly and carefully learning the map of each other's bodies, discovering what made the other gasp or sigh or shake with pleasure, and afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they fell asleep to the sound of Little Sparrow's peaceful breathing, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new reasons to be afraid, but also knowing that they would face those challenges together. 5 years passed. The village in the canyon grew and changed. Some people left heading north despite the dangers drawn by rumors that things were getting better for the Apache, that the reservations were becoming more livable. Others arrived refugees from other hidden communities, all seeking the same thing: safety, peace, a chance to rebuild. Elijah and Kaidi built a life there that neither of them could have imagined in those desperate early days. They had 2 children of their own now, a daughter named Catherine, after Elijah's sister, who had inherited her mother's height and her father's eyes, and a son named Thomas, after the child Elijah had lost, who was small and quick and laughed easily. Little Sparrow, now 10 years old, had grown into a serious, thoughtful child who helped Kaidi teach the younger children Apache traditions and stories. She still had nightmares, sometimes still woke up crying for her mother, but she also had good days, days when she smiled and played and seemed almost carefree. Jesse had found his place among the Apache, learning the language and customs of his mother's people. He had fallen in love with a young woman named Naylin, and they were planning to marry in the spring. He wrote letters to Virgil twice a year, long detailed accounts of his life, and Virgil wrote back with news from Arizona. The old Buffalo soldier had turned himself in as promised, had faced a court-martial, and had been given a dishonorable discharge but no prison time. He had gone back to his farm and was living quietly, refusing to let the judgment of the army define him. Marshal Price had visited once, riding alone into the village with his hands up, making it clear he came in peace. He had sat with Elijah and Kaidi for an entire afternoon, drinking coffee and talking about duty and mercy and the complicated business of trying to be a good person in a world that made it hard. When he left, he told them he would make sure no official reports ever mentioned their location. He was true to his word. Captain Reed had gotten his promotion eventually, though not through capturing Nietzsche or his granddaughter. He had distinguished himself in some minor skirmish near the border and had been made a major. Elijah had heard through Virgil's letters that Reed rarely spoke of his time hunting Apache fugitives and never mentioned the night he had been held at gunpoint by a woman who could have killed him, but chose mercy instead. The humiliation of that night had changed him in ways no one could have predicted. He became known as a fair officer, one who questioned orders that seemed cruel or pointless. Some said the giant Apache woman had taught him something that the army never could, that mercy was not weakness, but the truest form of strength. On a spring morning, 5 years to the day after they had first crossed the Rio Grande, Elijah stood at the edge of the canyon watching the sun rise over the desert. Kaidi came to stand beside him, their daughter on her hip, their son holding her hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I am thinking about how strange life is." Kaidi leaned against him, her free arm wrapping around his shoulders. "You have every right to be happy. You fought for this happiness. You risked everything for it. You earned it." "We earned it," Elijah corrected. "Both of us." Little Sparrow came running up the path, breathless and excited. "Elijah, Kaidi, the scouts just returned. They say there are riders coming from the north." Elijah felt his stomach clench. After 5 years of peace, had someone finally found them? Had Reed come back with more soldiers? Had the Mexican army decided to clear out the hidden Apache villages? But when the riders crested the ridge an hour later, there were only 2 of them, and one of them was Virgil Kane. They met in the center of the village, and Virgil climbed down from his horse with a groan that spoke of long days in the saddle. He looked older, grayer, more worn, but his eyes were bright and his smile was genuine. "Elijah, Kaidi, it is good to see you both." They embraced like the old friends they were, and then Virgil turned to the man who had ridden with him. He was Apache, maybe 60 years old, with silver threading through his black hair and eyes that held the weight of years and sorrow and hard-won wisdom. "This," Virgil said, "is Chief Nietzsche. He has been released from the reservation in Florida. He came to find his granddaughter." Elijah felt Kaidi go still beside him. Little Sparrow, who had been hiding behind them, peeked out, her eyes going wide. Nietzsche looked at the child, and something broke in his weathered face. He sank to his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks, and opened his arms. Little Sparrow hesitated for only a moment, then ran to him, throwing herself into his embrace. They held each other like that for a long time, grandfather and granddaughter, the last pieces of a broken family coming back together. When they finally pulled apart, Naichi looked up at Kaiti. "Thank you," he said in Apache. "Thank you for keeping her safe. Thank you for giving her a childhood when the world wanted to take it away. Thank you for being the family she needed when I could not be there." Kaiti knelt beside him, taking his hand. "She is the bravest person I know. You should be very proud." "I am. And I am proud of you as well, Kaiti. You have done something I could not do. You have built a place where our people can live without fear. You have shown that it is possible to survive and even thrive despite everything they tried to take from us." That night the village held a feast to celebrate Naichi's return. There was food and music and stories told around fires that burned late into the night. Elijah sat with Kaiti and their children, watching little Sparrow sit beside her grandfather, her face glowing with happiness, and he felt a completeness he had never expected to find. Later, when the fires had died down and most people had gone to sleep, Naichi approached Elijah. The old chief sat down beside him, looking out at the stars that filled the desert sky. "Virgil told me what you did, how you fought for my granddaughter, how you gave up everything to protect her. I did what anyone would do. No. Most people would have turned away. Most people would have chosen safety over righteousness. You chose differently, and because of that, my granddaughter is alive and happy. I can never repay that debt." "There is no debt. She is family." Naichi smiled. "Yes, she is. And so are you now. You may not have been born Apache, but you have an Apache heart. You understand what it means to sacrifice for those you love, what it means to stand up when it would be easier to sit down, what it means to choose your own path even when the world tells you that path is impossible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two men from different worlds who had found common ground in the simple act of protecting a child. "What will you do now?" Elijah asked finally. "I will stay here with little Sparrow if the village will have me. I am too old to fight anymore, too tired to run. I just want to spend whatever time I have left with my granddaughter, teaching her about her people, making sure she knows where she comes from." "She knows. Kaiti has made sure of that." "Yes, she has. Your wife is a remarkable woman." "She is not actually my wife. We never had a formal ceremony." Naichi raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps that is something that should be remedied. After all, if you are going to be part of this family, we should make it official." 3 days later, on a clear morning with the whole village gathered to witness, Elijah and Kaiti were married in the Apache tradition. An elder performed the ceremony, speaking words in a language Elijah was still learning, tying their hands together with a cord made from twisted grass to symbolize the binding of their lives. When it was done, when they had been declared husband and wife before their community and their children and the spirits of their ancestors, Kaiti looked at Elijah with tears in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "We survived. We built a life. We found happiness in a world that tried to tell us we did not deserve it." Elijah pulled her close. This woman who had saved him in more ways than she could ever know. This woman who had shown him that love was still possible even after loss, that joy could grow in the ashes of grief. "Yes," he said, "we did." And as the village celebrated around them, as their children played, and little Sparrow laughed, and Naichi watched with pride, and Virgil smiled, and Jesse raised a toast to new beginnings, Elijah Morgan understood something he had not understood before. Redemption was not about erasing the past or pretending your mistakes had never happened. It was about choosing every single day to be better than you had been. It was about accepting love even when you thought you did not deserve it. It was about building something beautiful from the broken pieces of your life. It was about finding in the last place you expected to look the thing you had been searching for all along. Home.